Welcome back, everybody. This is the Ed Tech Tech Toe podcast. My name is Scott Azar, and I hope you're coming back for part two. So last episode, I won't call it last week, we had Greg and Laurie, who are accelerated for all earth science teachers, and they're teaching a high school level earth science class to their 8th graders. And it's a really interesting dynamic. I was blown away thinking that I was going to have a 20-minute interview. This would be kind of cool. And I could have just kept going. I had to cut the interview off even after 90 minutes. What they're doing is phenomenal. So just to kind of paint you this quick idea so we can get right back into part two, is they developed a system. It's called the grid. And in that system, students are learning how to not only learn a really complex topic, but they're doing so with a hybrid method that includes self-paced learning, some teacher-led moments. There's a lot of intentional practice where students are going to be talking to each other, conferencing with teachers. They're figuring out where their weaknesses are and having opportunities to redo those things and to try again on different assignments that are testing the same thing. This is an unbelievable system. Now, I got a couple of questions that I really wanted to address because I had a feeling that people would find this interesting but would want to know more. And I do hope a bunch of those questions do get answered in this second half, and I know they will for many of the questions I was asked. So one of the questions I was asked is, what does that grid actually count for? And so the grids that they show in the first episode, and I definitely think you need to check it out before you watch this episode, because I hope and I think it'll blow your mind. But that grid actually goes in as a second test grade. So students are working through the grid. And as they're going through the grid, not only they're assessing, what did I do today? Well, if I want to get to the next thing, what do I have to plan to do? And how would I rate my work ethic for the day? And so they're finding ways to intentionally build a lot of these executive function skills. At the same time, they're using spacing and interleaving to make sure that students are building and coming back to those old ideas. And so, I mean, there's just so many astounding research-based practices in this. And as they're going through a unit, they'll go through levels 1, 2, and 3. And level 3 at the end, everybody takes a test. And there are levels 4 and 5 where students can go and try to do something that's extra. Now, if they only go to the unit test, then that grid grade will be an 85. That's going to represent a test grade. So not only will the test be a test grade, that whole grid itself and working through the grid and getting themselves to mastery on all those preceding assignments before that would get them an 85. If they want to go for that 100, then they have to really work on their executive function skills to try to plan out how are they going to achieve the ability to start working on those levels 4 and 5. And so each level goes up a DOK level. And it's really about what students can do, and it's in I can phrases, but that's how it goes in as a grade. So you still have lab grades, you still have homework, you still have all of those things that are the same essential components. You just now have this given to you as a grade that equals a test grade. And what I believe in this episode, or the second part of this interview, they mention is that the grid grade and the test grades usually are pretty close to each other. And if a student doesn't really want to go beyond their, 85, that's their choice. But the kids that at least want to, they can plan out how to do that. And I just think that's awesome. The fact that a kid can choose what they want to try to accomplish, and they can learn those skills that we really always want those kids to have. And this is a really interesting way to do that. The other thing that I've gotten feedback on was that, wow, this just seems like so much stuff. And I believe in this second half, or it could have been the first half, which was not a helpful statement at all, but it was COVID that did a lot of this. There's stuff all over the internet. They made videos during COVID, right? There's tons of stuff. So what they said was really, yes. Was there planning? Absolutely. There's going to always be planning no matter what. There's nothing like this that you're just going to walk into and be like, yep, we're done already. But having said that, they did not reinvent the wheel. They used a tremendous amount of the materials they already have and they just put it somewhere new. So instead of a plan book, let's just say, this is where they put that stuff. They put that information onto this grid system so students can access it. So it's really just taking what they had and assembling it in a different way. Having said that, again, there's a lot of intention in a lot of these assignments. And so we might, and especially if you're in New York, we're going to have to do a lot of new curriculum development. So, hey, this is the time we should do it because this way we're not doing something and then doing it over again. Anyway, I don't want to take up too much of your time listening to me drone on. I really want to get back to this interview. If you're listening to this, I highly recommend you come back and check it out on a computer so you can watch the video and not only listen to what this sounds like, but watch and actually look at the grid itself. If you feel more comfortable, I also post this on YouTube. Drop some questions and comments. And as promised, I was given a grid to share. And so I will be posting that in the show notes so you can have a grid that you can make a copy of and get a better understanding of how it lays out, what the back looks like. And what I also want to stress is because their grid looks like this, yours doesn't have to look like this. Your grid is going to look however you feel like it needs to look for your room if you choose to take on this model. We had a guest speaker in my district. His name is Myron Dewick. And he was phenomenal. And when I was listening to this stuff, I was like, wow, there's so much of what he's talking about that this actually does. I'll also link his stuff below and you can kind of check out the two. He gave us a bunch of resources. I actually am really excited. I think this is the way that I'm going to go for next year. And I'm going to hopefully be working with Greg and some other people who are also excited about this opportunity. But again, I'm going to drop a bunch of stuff in the show notes for you. Thank you so much for sticking around and checking this out. I really hope that you find this as impactful as I feel like it can be. And also, last little plug, if you're curious about any EdTech tips and tutorials, check out the Azar Sciences YouTube channel, which is where I post a ton of other stuff. And enjoy the rest of my interview with Greg and Laurie.
Go ahead, Laurie. I know you want.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because, again, that's something that comes with time, where the kids start to take it seriously and they're pretty accurate in their self-reflections. And Greg and I are always saying to him, just like he was starting to say, nobody's a 5 every day, but you don't want to be a 1 every day either. If you come in and you're a 2 because you're tired, you're cranky, or you didn't sleep, or you don't feel good, then you just better make a plan that tomorrow you're going to come in and be a 4 or a 5, and tomorrow's a new start and a new day. But it is interesting that we have found a very strong correlation between the grid effort grade and the grade that they get on the actual summative assessment at the end. It's just really interesting. And I think kids, we point it out to them all the time. Like, look in Power School. If you got through the first 3A, let's say, and that got you an 80 and your test score was an 82, wow, I wonder what one thing has to do with another. Or if I really didn't do enough and I only got to level 2 and I got a 65 on the test, well, those things correlate with each other. So effort is a big piece of the puzzle because everybody's got deficits and everybody's got things they're good and bad at, but you can always improve your effort. And so that's something that we really try to impress on them as well.
So then are you collecting their grids back? And like, how do you determine the work ethic grade on your end?
Yeah, so within our Power School, our grade book, we are able to make little notations, of course, and then certainly here we have comments that once we collect their grids and they identify, we have them, like when they turn in their grids, they put a box around the activity that they finish. So if they finish 4A, this would be, like a highlighted box. And so then we know, all right, they are telling us that they submitted something for 4A. And then we look at it and so Laurie and I will sit each grid because every grid is different length. Like what we're looking at here, weathering, erosion, deposition, is one of our longer ones. And so certain levels reaching a certain spot might not correlate to every other chapter, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But the highest level is always going to be a max of 100. You can earn that by doing everything that you need to do. Now, comments leaves us if we know a student really attempted something but didn't really hit the mark, it allows us to give them that feedback and also a couple extra, boosted points from what 3B would have given them. Now they at least attempted 4A and started to get a good product and maybe just didn't follow through all the way, then they can bump their grid score up a little bit higher. So it's a little bit I don't want to say it's really subjective, but it's a conversation that Laurie and I will have, and we'll often during our prep time say, what do you think about this student where they put this together, and we'll kind of get a best guess about what we think their effort has earned them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and especially if we have a student that is a really struggling learner and they made it all the way to 4A and they put the effort in, we want to reward them for pushing themselves and trying and having the confidence to take a risk. At the levels 4 and 5 too, we know the kids that we need to just be like, look, this is where you're more on your own. There's not hand holding for you here, because that means that you're at a higher level than the class is being taught, and you need to show us what you have and you need to push yourself. Whereas if there's a student that needs some scaffolding there, then we can support that, and so we do that as much as we can. But it's tough content. So when we see a struggling learner make it to a level 4, that's a pretty big celebration.
Yeah.
And then if we go into a meeting where someone wants us to justify, what kind of kid is this kid, or what kind of supports will they need in the future, and we could say, he or she struggles a little bit on the testing, and that's shown here, but look how hard this kid is working in the classroom, So it doesn't just pigeonhole them into, oh, your test grade is what you are. It's
Right.
also how hard are you willing to work, and we can demonstrate to anybody, their next year's teacher, or even further down the line, like, this kid will work hard for you, or the kid's a good test taker and just doesn't want to put in any effort and is down level 2 every time. Then we also have that data. So it does kind of mesh with the personality of the kid, the willingness to work, and so that's kind of one of our favorite things about it, is that anybody can put in the effort. There's never any excuse for not working hard. Now, will you have bad days? Of course. Will you fall behind at times? Yes. But you have that ability. They know what they could do throughout the grid, and we try to remind them, hey, get ahead today. If you're free after school, there's nothing going on, watch the next video, do the next diagram. We'll have them drawing concepts, and they actually assign themselves homework if they want to be up in that level 4 and 5 by the end of the grid.
Yeah, it's always great to have, like now we'll have kids come up to us at the end of the period and they'll be like, hey, Mr. Izzo, Mr. D, I think my plan is going to be, I'm going to go home tonight and do this. And then I have practice, but then I'm going to do this. And then I'm going to go to extra help, and so now they're starting to really take ownership and think through and plan, and all those executive functioning skills that are so critical for their success as they move into the high school. So, all that executive functioning work is also embedded into the grid, because they're really directing their own learning, and they are in charge of how far they get ultimately.
Because I think this is great, and I'm assuming too, even something that you didn't mention, but I'm sure there are also like labs that are getting graded, and there's there's probably plenty of assignments too. So it's not like you're getting a grid grade, a test grade, and like that's it. And maybe you're not a great test taker yet, but your grid grade is great. It's a tongue twister. So there's a tremendous amount of opportunity here. When I was at the Asset conference today, one of the things that people were talking about was that students are really struggling with social skills. So I see you have conferences, and you've mentioned a couple times conferences with you guys. So how do you also incorporate kids working with each other, and also, not basically working independently, where they're just like on their, computer or whatever it is, they're sitting, and it's just like I'm sure it's not a quiet room. So how do you work those social pieces into it, where they're collaborating with their classmates, especially if they're not in different places?
Yeah.
Well, there's a lot of built-in opportunities within the grid, especially certain activities where we'll actually say in the box, you can work with a partner if you choose. So always on the vocabulary, that's like the 1A for every grid. And kids, will sit next to their friend or their partner, whomever they choose, and they'll talk about the vocabulary and they'll work on that together. If we always do sort of pauses where if we're doing a lab that we need to collect data, we'll do a pause so everybody's got that piece done. And then when they get to that point in the grid where they're going to answer the questions or apply concepts in the lab, then that they're doing either with a friend or independently. We do a lot of turn and talking, we'll just maybe bring up some, phenomena or something that's going on that particular day if we're doing weather, or like we just did one with the equinox. And so there are always times in the classroom where kids are interacting with each other. I think also the conferencing piece with us is building social skills because we're modeling for them. They're learning how to be confident in utilizing academic vocabulary. And many times those conferences are with another kid. So they'll practice together. They'll talk about things together before they come up to us. And then maybe, Greg, you want to talk about the pauses are also moments where there's always like groups of kids or little pockets of kids that are working together or talking together in those moments as well.
Yeah, I think my favorite thing, and probably both of our favorite things with the grid, is that you can make it whatever you want as well. And so just because we're doing these boxes in this order doesn't mean we can't just do a full group, some kind of demonstration or some kind of activity where they can break out into groups and discuss, their knowledge for what we're doing that day. We'll do whole group stuff. We'll say, all right, let's do an activity where we place a moon globe in the center of the room and have, a light shining on it and move around the room in partners and sketch, what the phase looks like. And then we'll have kids creating earthquakes in the room and jumping from P wave to P wave, on Post-its on the floor, and they're all kind of, goofing. And so that stuff is super important. And I always think that we should definitely be doing those things that we enjoy and we know the kids enjoy as well. And then on, in things like the weathering lab that you see up on the screen, we'll always mention that, oh yeah, we're going to do a full class pause for the data. So there are opportunities to build in whichever activities that you'd like to do.
It also gives you a way to like bring everybody back and also review, even if they maybe didn't finish 1B, but you're going to bring some of that back in. So even if they're going back to something afterwards, maybe they have to backtrack a little bit. They're getting some context from that lab too, because self-paced. There's a lot of research that kind of contradicts the efficacy of it. Like you said, there's a lot of soft skills that get developed, but then it typically, which this is no surprise, there's a lot of research that shows how there's a lot of benefit for the kids that are your high achievers, the ones that are going to move forward, and then a lot of your apathetic or struggling learners tend to not do so well. They tend to do better with more of direct instruction. So that's what I love about this is like you incorporate the both of them together, and it's also in a way where you can conference. And so you're not just doing something where the kid is just like, okay, I did this, and you have no idea that they're not understanding it until the end, that you're finding ways to make them talk to these different kids. Having a differentiated class or a heterogeneous, we could use grouping and say, hey, you two finish first, like you crush it on this, and you also know your students, like you go work with, I don't know, those two kids over there too. So like the kids that are really high, much higher and excelling, they're now going to be better because now you're kind of forcing them to play teacher, which helps you guys, right? That's huge. Being able to leverage kids, you're building the confidence in those kids. Say, wow, they trust me to do this.
Right.
And then you're getting that blend between teaching them those skills to do these things on their own and build that confidence, but it also ensures that their grades, assuming, obviously I'm sure this doesn't go perfect every single time with kids. And like you said, they're doing these and they only get a 60. And you're like, well, we got to look at what we got to fix, right? But so that those are more of those soft skills that you're building and they can go back and redo it. And so that's awesome. So that's what I think is so cool about this, is because it really is blending which is good research says helps kids the most, which is finding those ways to build those skills that everyone says kids don't have anymore. And then putting that with like that direct instruction and those opportunities to do these things that are, the things that kids remember: running around, jumping on Post-its, sugar cubes, shaking the things. And like, everyone likes to take the sugar cubes, put them in a jar and play maracas, the kids always love that. I would put music on, and you don't want to lose those things.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's the fear of a lot of people who might be unwilling to try this out is that, I like the things that I do. And like you said earlier, all you need to do is find where it fits. Find what type of level activity is it? Is it a really easy intro activity? All right, keep it on level one. Is it like a straightforward define this or identify or point out where this is on planet Earth? Yeah, like do that in level one. And then you can see, and I kind of want to dovetail into your other question that, how do we fit things in certain levels? Well, like level two is usually applying and demonstrating or some kind of explanation. And then level three is comparing and contrasting, situations, maybe perhaps novel situations. So for instance, like they have to call back in 3A their situations, comparing physical weathering types and demonstrating. And this is one of our favorite things that, I got to give a whole lot of credit to Laurie with the evidence piece and our writing pieces that we've started to develop, is that this is a higher level activity that, yes, the first two columns are easy. They have to name the type of weathering and then the type and then the specific name. And then now they have to really prove using their knowledge, like, I know that why this is because this is exactly the evidence that I'm identifying in the image. So it's not just, oh, this is root action, but it's, here's what I see that leads me to think that it's root action, even though I wasn't there for it to happen,
And then this is how it occurs. So it's also just a little bit of spacing, which is, again, really great.
Yep.
That's backed by neuroscience. That's really awesome. So this is hard for me. I'm trying to also wrap my head around this. So this is really a question for me that was not in the ones I sent you. Because I know you were saying that you use like the depth of knowledge wheel kind of to come up with these different things. But something that just dawned on me because I'm looking at this is, how do you manage maybe level one activities that, for example, I see like, you have weathering and erosion and all that. But then when you start to get to streams and glaciers, you have to go back to there is a lot of vocabulary that are in those things. So is that all in that first, let's just say there's like, I think I had a quizzes that was like 67. I mean, weathering and erosion is a huge vocabulary heavy. So are they doing 67 words just for an example, or do you kind of circle back to those when you go into streams and then glaciers? So do you?
Yeah, Laurie, I'll pull this up if you wanna take this.
Yeah. So this is something that really made us look with a very critical eye on when and where and how we place certain things into the grid. So we had to keep reminding ourselves that level one, all they have to do is identify or label. They don't have to go into depth, but they have to start, being able to do those sort of most basic recall of things. We also found that, yes, if there's 45 vocabulary terms, they're not going to sit there and just read in a book and type out these terms. So we'll help them out. Sometimes it's fill in the blank. Sometimes we provide the term and they find a picture. Sometimes we give them the picture and they find the term. And this is an activity actually that works really well with pairing the kids up, because they look together, finding things and talking about it. They quiz each other before they come up to us. But yeah, so then when we circle up to level two, then now they're starting to apply. So they might have to point to a picture of meander and say, oh yeah, that's a meander. But in level two, now you have to start thinking, okay, so how does the water move within a meander to create either erosion or deposition? On which side? What would that look like? How would that change the nature of the landscape over time? And then level three would be even higher, where they're really explaining what they're seeing, describing how a process happens, maybe even thinking about how it would change over time, a little bit of extrapolation into the future. So it's always like building upon, because of course you have to keep returning to that vocabulary.
Yeah.
And one of the things that Greg and I struggle with a little bit too is all the research now is saying, don't preload the vocabulary, don't pre-teach. But we really have found that that initial exposure, at least, because this is novel vocabulary for even the highest level student in our class. How many times have you used any of these words in their prior history as a 13 or 14-year-old? And the answer is
run around talking about abrasion?
Or
this
erratic.
I'm talking about.
Wow, they might have said that kid is being really erratic.
Maybe
over there.
Yeah. Well, yeah, exactly. Anyway, so we do, we spiral up in what the kids are expected to be able to do with regard to those terms. But, that's, and then we decided that the test is typically at a level 3. So we really based all those gray boxes on the standards that they're expected to be able to accomplish within that unit. And that's where the I can statement comes from. And then we built in with the DOK wheel, the levels that it would take to reach that by the time they finish the unit.
This is awesome.
And then levels 4 and 5, the recommendation from the initial company that worked with us was that level 5 is totally independent, meaning like go find something out about the topic that you want to know more about. And we found like, yes, that's good, but we also wanted to have a little bit more direction. We're in an 8th grade room, so they're not used to doing those really, even our high level kids are not willing or able to design a whole thing all by themselves. So we kind of give them little tips and things that they should include within an independent project. And we do have a lot of independence embedded within there.
I'm also just thinking too, right? So I did this episode now, Google Docs, and it's cool that you've created this on Google Docs, because I've seen things like this done on Google Slides. That's where kind of a HyperDoc originally was, where you're embedding a lot of videos, and basically each slide is its next task, which I like this because it's very it's visible to see like your whole roadmap in front of you. But what's also interesting too now is they have these building blocks that you can add. So when you're doing even an independent exploration, you could turn these into like mini group things, but the independent parts, you can have kids work on project management now with a lot of their by making basically trackers, and the kids can also learn how to like use that tracking with a group. I mean, they make it so easy just by hitting the @ sign, and it drops the whole thing down, and they have already pre-built blocks where you really just plug and play the information. I mean, that would be something when you set that up as a Google Doc for them, you could do like name of partner and like who's doing, X, Y, and Z, and who's going to narrate, who might do the editing or something like that. It's also like kind of teaching them networking too. Like I'm just going off, like you said, you had a kid who's great with iMovie and all of this, and you might have had another kid who's, and like networking is the name of the game too, right? That's an important skill, is like finding those people who could help you elevate yourself, but then having them track that through digitally and assigning things. And there's so many really cool updates now too that I'm really interested to see how this ends up kind of growing in the future, which is actually really the last part of this too, is since I'm hoping one day this is like a worldwide thing, right? And people like check out this episode, and there's like it was the 3rd episode where they hit the money. Although I'll probably have to break this into 2. But you know what?
We'll have to come up with a cliffhanger.
Yeah, I'll have to. It's like, it's gonna be like, where is it? Find out next week.
Well, the new standards could be the cliffhanger, because we're trying to figure that out.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is gonna be like the I have no idea portion. Because a little backstory. I don't know, Laurie, if Greg kind of filled you in on how this whole thing even ended up happening. We were in the master teacher program. We were meeting with these people from the North Country Earth Science group, and like Greg just casually pulls up this grid. He's like, "This is what I do," and I was like, "This is unbelievable," because one of the things that we're working on in the same group is like, how do we create? I think you already said it, Laurie. Like, how do we do this instruction that's student paced, student exploration, inquiry based? Like, we're also meeting the needs of our students with IEPs. If we're universally accelerating, now you have that, because like you guys are going to also have something that I'm not going to have a problem with, is that the next generation science standards are supposed to be built on these progressions, and by universally accelerating, you're kind of yoinking the things that they're supposed to. So now they're intentionally being set up with a gap. And so it's like, oh my God, like how do you manage all of these things? And in my mind, one of the things that I said was, this is what you guys do is amazing, but now how could we take that and start to make a switch? Like how have you guys thought about how that might look a little different going into, so in New York we're calling them the New York State Science Learning Standards. The rest of the country calls them the Next Generation Science Standards. They're basically the same thing, except we threw more stuff in ours.
Yep. Didn't want to lose rocks and minerals. We got to keep it all.
Yes, they did find that clever way to stick that in. So I mean, have you guys thought about how that might end up? Kind of like, are you thinking maybe like a phenomenon based approach, or yeah, how do we make 3D learning with these cross-cutting concepts and these science and engineering practices and the disciplinary core ideas and our performance expectations and all these alphabet soup things? And yeah.
Go ahead.
It's tough, obviously, without having any clue what this is all going to look like yet. So we're trying to make decisions on what to change without really knowing what the end game is yet. So that piece has been different, or difficult, I should say. But like at the conference we went to, we were lucky enough to have our whole real team go there. I think the phenomena-based part is definitely something that we're going to do. I think we all thought that made sense. It's something engaging for the kids. Obviously, we're going to have to move to a lot more modeling of close reading of very challenging academic content. And we're going to have to put a lot more writing, introducing that language, claim evidence reasoning. Yeah. And Greg and I were even talking today that maybe that becomes our pauses, is going to be pulling the kids together for the aspects of these challenging labs that we're responsible for. That's a pause that has to be a whole group. Bringing them together to introduce that language and teach them how to collect evidence that supports a claim. Maybe that's a pause.
So
the modeling close read, I don't know. So, but again, like you just said, all of these things are going to be additions at a higher level, where the kids are then still expected, though, to have all that foundational knowledge. So we have to figure out what we have to take out in order to make room to teach these higher order thinking skills as well.
Because there's no way it's not feasible to do the two levels in one. And we're noticing that more and more, that they will have some gaps, Scott, and we don't know how sustainable the model is where we universally accelerate. It's certainly not up to us. So we kind of have to operate under the assumption that we're going to keep going with this and try to provide them with the opportunities we can to just keep interacting and building upon, whatever course you're teaching. I'm sure, still reviewing concepts that the 8th graders come in from the general science course that they should have background on. By the time they get to you're probably still reviewing. So I don't think there's ever going to be a perfect alignment and going right from one year into the next. But we're trying to figure out what are the things that we don't necessarily need to include. And I think that's going to come with, what does the actual assessment look like? And I know we're not supposed to teach to a test, but we can get a good idea of what the state is looking for when we have that physical exam and say, all right, these are the types of questions. And I think, as Laurie said, with the phenomenon-based, an initial part of our units, that might, lead us to more novel circumstances that we can build upon, and they might not get every little piece of every single standard, but if we can develop the skills and the ability to cross-cut, I think that is the best of what we could do.
I'm just thinking out loud, and I think I mentioned this to you on the side too. So, we have those performance level descriptions where I think I'm getting this like very project-based learning sense in this whole NIST change of how we're teaching and exploring phenomenon and all that. I'm just throwing this out there because what I think we're gonna see happening, and I think it could be good, is unraveling the typical unit into something that is jumbled, which is really how, I know that's the way the world works, right? You look at my favorite example was like a GIF of a volcano. And so like with that volcano, you can teach, rocks and minerals, you could teach climate, you could teach insulation and how, sunlight can't get through. There's so many different things you could teach off that one volcano, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think that's what I sort of see kind of transitioning. So you're not doing a weathering and erosion unit. Maybe you're doing how, there's a phenomenon. Or today they were talking about what could you do with this picture of garbage on a beach? And I was like, oh, well, you could probably like teach ocean currents
Mhm.
And then you could teach like wave action, and you could also then like have the kids develop using what they've learned to develop a beach cleanup protocol. So like, in Jones Beach or whatever, they have like the jetties, like because the current flows down this is where you're going to want to look to probably find, because this is what our coastline look like. And this could help you to, and obviously these could be like your level 4s or 5s now, where kids are trying to figure out like where's the garbage going to collect, so this way you're not just wasting people scattering them all over a beach. Like, no, it goes this way, and there are these things that are going to naturally probably want to catch that garbage. But I would almost wonder if your grids become different sizes, but like maybe are phenomenon based, and then I couldn't agree with you more. I think the idea that we're not teaching the kids, or they're not expected to know vocabulary words, is foolish. Like, I'll say it to anybody, because I think, like, I get it. They can learn something, and it's not important that maybe they know that name of that thing right now. They don't have to know what it's called. Sure, if they've discovered something and they put their own words to it, like, yeah, cool. But at the end of the day, if these are things that are well known, you can't be calling something, I don't know, a screwdriver, and it's like, no, that's actually called root action.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, you have to have
You
some
have to be
common
able to,
vocabulary
yes, yes.
to communicate. You have to communicate, right? And that's going to take common vocabulary. So I do think that might be an awesome way to do this. And you could still have your level 1s where you're like, kids are learning how to do things. Maybe kids are just working on claims in level 1. Again, I'm totally, and you could talk right in with me. I'm just sort of, because I think there's something huge here to be capitalized on.
Yeah.
With what
There
guys
are
are doing.
aspects of it, like you're saying, that are so exciting, because you're like, wow, this could actually be so cool. And the kids would be exploring and doing all these neat things. But, from I guess, just a perspective of, as the teacher with this big curriculum and these enormous, complicated standards, trying to kind of like pull them out of the web into where they fit, and then making sure that you cover everything while also making it like this jazzy exploratory thing for kids. I don't know. I mean, I know Greg and I have talked about it a lot. We don't want to stop doing the grid, because if anything, ratcheting up expectations and ratcheting up the skills that kids are required to have only makes something like this, I think, more important for kids, so that we can meet them where they are. But it's just a question of how much we have to kind of blow up and put back together, compared to the way we sort of lay it out now, compared to what it's going to look like once we figure out how to incorporate the standards.
Yeah, and the level of the kids is also one of the things that gives me a little caution with that, because we have 8th grade students, and as adults we can follow the progression of that impact of an erupting volcano. We can pull all these things that we know from either our daily life or from our education as we've gone through. And one of the concerns, if you do, like, let's say 4 incredibly large phenomena that can pull all the stuff, like Laura was saying, and putting it into, it fits in this category over here under this, is that it gets lost to an 8th grade student, especially in the special ed lens of, like, are they going to be able to follow all of these steps and be able to bring it back around and connect it, 8 weeks later? That's a hard thing. And I agree, though. It's really, I mean, that is really what earth science should be, in terms of meshing every little subtopic of it all at once. Because you're right, it makes so much sense. Just as a middle school 8th grade student, I don't know how much bang for our buck we would get with that. I think maybe at the higher levels, and that's, one of the conversations we're having with our admin and with other people involved in the decision making is, is this too high level at that, with the new standard?
Yeah. Or even if it's, because I know phenomenon is going to be this phenomenon based approach too. I mean, even if we're doing it in chunks, right? Even if we're just looking at the same volcano, but you might have 4 grids that are against the volcano, right? And they're still like the same thing. Maybe we're just looking at the rocks and minerals part, and we're still using that volcano, but you're really teaching the rocks and minerals. You might be doing, hey, this is how these kinds of rocks get made. How might other ones get made? Like, these rocks don't look like these, right? And then maybe that is still your classic grid of like rocks, minerals, you do the same thing. It's like, what's oozing out of this volcano? And so like
Right.
it's completely new, but now you're just doing plate tectonics under the guise of this volcano, right? And then it's
Right.
like, oh, this is this thing, but like, okay, like the airport got shut down because there was a volcanic eruption. Like, why is that happening? And so it's a different grid that's still on the same volcano, but now we're looking at like weather or something like that. I think that's more of where I'm at, instead of like, I don't think even 10th grade, my kids, if I was like, we're going to spend 4 months on this volcano and it's going to be all over the place. But what it could be cool, which is what you guys you put a lot of intention into interleaving and spacing. And it's really evident in the way that you just take level 1 and then it goes to level 2 and it's like, well, you have to take what you did here and now you got to apply it here.
Build it.
And so it could be interesting too to like figure out once that happens. And I also think this will just take time, right? I'm just going to keep with my volcano because I think it's like the only good one I got left or at the moment. But like then what you're doing could even build into that, right? So it's like, okay, I've seen this. I learned how the volcano got made, rocks and minerals, and I've done my plate tectonics with the thing. And then like, could you then do something towards the end? So they've done these little chunks of this idea and then like just getting them to think and put it together sort of, all right, we've been doing all this volcano stuff. Like how could these things work together as like, I mean, that's kind of what they're trying to do with these investigations that we're having to do, right? They are like, hey, let's learn about Kepler's laws of planetary motion. And then they throw random questions in there about like the seasons. And it's like, what is going on? And it's clear that there's stuff that they should be taking from other points and sort of like trying to synthesize that back. So, I mean, that could maybe help.
I like that kind of marrying the two together. That's a really good idea.
One of the things that I'm excited about is the modeling piece. We've been talking a lot about that. I do love the idea. Like we use these diagramming notebooks. We've used them for years now where the kids sketch out concepts that are very abstract or challenging or things that aren't memorization. They aren't in the SRT. And we've been thinking about that piece. Like I love the drawing and I love that like brain connection that there is. A lot of the kids have said that really helps them to like have a concept really gel in their heads. But now like changing that to be like, okay, like a simple one that we tried out this year is just open up to the next page and draw your understanding of what the solar system looks like. And then at the end of the unit, we had to come back and change the model to reflect what they had learned. So think about the spacing and the sizing and the order and what things that you learned are in the solar system that you didn't include in your original model. And that's very simplistic based on the things that they're expecting, but just that iterative piece where they're creating a model and then using what they learn to add to it and change it.
Well, I'm just thinking that's so great for like your level 1, and then you do your level 2, draw, like look at your model, draw about it, like draw your model, like
Going
what
back
changed.
to it.
Go to level 3, and now you've taken your test, like draw it again.
Mm-hmm.
And even that too, I think could be really, really powerful and is a nice way to do it within this grid system that you guys have put together. There's so much. It's tough though, because there's so much we really just don't know. And so that'd be something for anybody who listens to this and is doing NGSS to like throw stuff in the comments to let people know how you're doing this. Because I think this is such an opportunity, but I also think that it's what's going to be a mess. Like tutoring is going to be a mess. Like, because I already see it now for some of the people that I'm tutoring, a couple of kids in districts that have already switched, and a couple of my colleagues are too. And like, they're just like, I don't understand what this teacher is doing. And this is before, because some of us are doing it, some of us aren't doing it, right? We're sticking with the old curriculum for a lot of us. And one of my coworkers came in, he was explaining what this test was on. He's like, I don't get it. He was talking about, it was for biology, these elephants and this and that. And I was like, they're probably in the new standards. And he's like, oh, that makes sense. Because I was wondering why they were just doing like a little of this, a little of that, a little of that. And to me, it made no sense. Like, how are they blowing through ecology in like a week? And it's like, they probably weren't. They're probably just doing one little piece. But I think that this is going to be exciting, that you can kind of do things however you see best fit. But at the same time, it's going to be chaotic because I think everyone's going to be everywhere. And then they're going to be coming in. So, and I was even just thinking too, like maybe your level 1s, maybe they're the middle school stuff, right? Maybe they're like the ones that pertain. You can't do it all, but at least like we're doing solar system and, we're at we're doing XYZ with the moon, but like maybe your level 1 is that middle school stuff, or maybe it's almost like a pre-assessed, or maybe you have a level 0. I'm thinking out loud here, but like maybe you pre-test. Maybe you put questions about the stuff that they should have learned in middle school, and if they pass that, they go right to level 1. And if you don't, you start at level 0, and it's going to be tough to pace all that stuff. But then, like, I'm just trying to think of like how we make it as painless as it's going to be in this very painful process.
Yeah,
I love how you say level 0. But the problem is now, like, we've got 5 levels, right? So now we're thinking, okay, now we need to go from like 0 to 12, to incorporate all the stuff. And I don't know how we're going to make that.
I think some of them will be easier. I think some of the middle school stuff that we have to assume kids don't know and won't know in 8th grade, right? Like, some of them aren't going to be so bad. Like, we could throw in some of those moon things and we can kind of embed them in those. But I mean, I would have to really look to see what other earth science related things would be missed in that. And I know that kind of exists somewhere too, but I'm sure some of them you can mush together, but then some of them are really probably foundational. And then you have to like do a second.
Yeah, that's the concern, is that, it's not that it's the standards are different. It's just that if they do build, they don't have that base to build upon. So,
and they're going to a 10th grade level in 8th grade.
Right. And
real
I
10th
think
grade.
Right. And I think that you're absolutely right in terms of, level 1 could marry some of that in there. I think it's also good teaching just to review some of the concepts that the kids are not going to carry along with them from 2 or 3 years earlier. So, but it will be just in terms of the sheer level of the standard and the ask. The normal earth science test, the current one, the old one, is a level 2, really. Maybe a little bit of level 3 on the, on the end of the test, but most of it is a 2. And then now it's pretty obvious that everything has moved up a level.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, even just the reasoning, that's hard. And trying to scaffold all this stuff, it's going to be a huge undertaking. So I'm hoping, we have a few more meetings with the master teacher program. We start to come up with some ideas on how we can do this. And we'll have to revisit this in the future and have you guys back on too, like next year.
Yeah.
And keep seeing how this goes. So I don't want to take up any more of your time. This has been amazing. I can't thank you both enough, because this has been like super informative. I just looked at the time and I was like, whoa, that's right. It's like, it's an hour and 24 minutes. And I still, in my brain, I'm like, I think we're like really just scratching some of the surface of what this could do. But
yeah, we could keep going for sure. Yeah. Thanks for having us, guys.
Yeah,
fun.
thank you. This has been a lot of fun.
Yeah. We can talk about it forever. So anytime,
I'm sure,
anytime you want more.
All right. Well, that's the end of part 2. I had to cut it off. I couldn't make it a 3-parter. It was getting late. And to be honest, I'll just have to have them back. I did that on purpose. So I'd have to, bring them back on. And hopefully next year, as our curriculum changes and we make some adjustments and we add some twists on what they're doing, which is awesome. Hopefully we'll make a big improvement. But thank you so much for coming by, for sticking with us for maybe part 1 and part 2. Again, check out those show notes below, which will have the copy of the grid, which you can make a copy of as well. And then check out some of those resources from Myron Dewick, who you'll see does a lot of similar stuff. He was a phenomenal speaker. Heck, maybe we can get enough listeners that I can say, hey, come talk to everybody. So, share this, follow, put it on repeat a few times, maybe a little YouTube, and then on the way in, and then re-listen to Spotify on the way out. No, just kidding. But honestly, thank you so much. It means a lot that anybody's listening. I'm hoping it helps somebody, because then this is why I started this. I just want to share all the really cool things that are happening. And if you have something that's really cool that you would like to share, hey, let's figure it out and reach out to me. But until next time, thanks again. And I hope you have a great day.